wouldn't normally use a microphone because my years of litigating in high anxiety have forced me to learn to project my voice, and I don't normally need a microphone, but I understand that we're recording, so please tell me if anybody can't hear or if I'm doing a lot of feedbacky things. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Professor Cotter, very much for your kind remarks about my law firm in particular and the work that we have tried to do. As Professor Cotter has told you, I'm a lawyer here in the city, and I'm going to talk about a little bit about my experience, but more about what the practice of pro bono services can mean for you as students and beginning your careers. I'm very grateful as well for the opportunity to be part of this series, which my firm is very proud to sponsor. And I'm just going to throw out one more little bit of pride, if you will, in that at the awards banquet for the National Pro Bono Conference last week, our firm was very, very honored to win the National Law Firm Pro Bono Award, which is a huge accomplishment for a Saskatchewan firm. It's the first time a Saskatchewan firm has won that award. And the firm was competing against national firms with a lot more resources than our small firm here in Saskatchewan. Not small by Saskatchewan standards, but relatively. So I'm very proud of that, and it adds to my pride in being here to talk to you today. And I'm talking about a topic that I care very much about, and that is about lawyers making a difference. And lawyers do make a difference. Anywhere you care to look, you'll see them. They're sitting on the boards of nonprofits like the United Way or the Food Bank. They're serving Thanksgiving meals at the Friendship Inn. They're helping newcomers to Canada get oriented. They're chairing committees or sections in their professional organization. They're organizing fundraisers. They're donating to charities of all kinds. They're reading with kids in inner city schools. They're coaching. They're walking dogs at the SPCA. You name it. All of those diverse activities illustrate, obviously, that there are numerous ways that people can and do give back to their communities. And that short list doesn't scratch the surface, as you can imagine. Volunteerism in general is an important element of modern Canadian society for lots of historical and cultural reasons. And there are studies that show that a degree of occupational self-determination, which I take to mean an element of flexibility or freedom, increases the rate of volunteering, especially among people who are better educated, and especially in what are thought of as higher status occupations. Those people tend to volunteer more, interestingly. And certainly, generally speaking, the legal profession fits the description of what people tend to think of as a higher status, better educated occupation with a fair degree of that occupational flexibility. But in reality, so do many other professions fit that description. And yet, the literature on volunteerism in other professions is quite different than it is in the legal profession. For example, one study I read found that fewer than 1/2 of United States physicians had volunteered at anything in the previous year. Another study, and I apologize if there's any people with social work backgrounds in the room, because it's kind of a very negative comment that I came across in this study as I was preparing for this talk today. In the United States, apparently social workers simply do not volunteer, period, at least according to the responses in this study that I read. And there's this view, apparently, at least this is what the authors of the study concluded, that social workers in the States feel that they already do enough because they're very poorly paid and they do really difficult work. And as you can imagine, there probably are people in all professions that feel that way. But in contrast to that, the rate of volunteerism among Canadian lawyers is significantly higher than in the national average. So, I mean, why do we do what we do as lawyers? What makes us volunteer hours and hours of our time and try to help those who might be less fortunate than us in some way? I'm a lawyer. I'm not a social scientist or a philosopher. I don't know the answer to the why. What I'm going to try to do in a few moments is maybe suggest some reasons why you might want to be part of that movement, if you will. From my own personal perspective, I think it probably comes down, at least in part, to our personal experiences. When I think about my own motives, I think about the people that I encountered at various times in my earlier life who intervened in different ways and helped to make sure that I took, at a crossroads, that I took a better path and avoided mistakes that might have led me to a very different place than standing in front of you here today. In some way, trying to do my part now to give back makes me feel that maybe those people, if they knew, would feel that the time they put into me and the effort they made for me was worth it. That they've spent their time well. And I don't think that those people set out to be recognized or ask themselves whether, helping one kid or one family was going to really make a difference in the world. I suspect they did those things that they did that helped me because they felt blessed in their own lives, grateful to be part of a pleasant community, and because they wanted to do their part to keep it that way. And they did it because it felt good. And they did it because they could. And I think those are basically the reasons that most lawyers volunteer as well. Each of you probably has your own reasons for what you do or what you're thinking of doing, and I suspect that because you're here today, that you're already doing things or thinking of doing things by way of volunteerism. And that's great. And I encourage you to take as many opportunities to contribute to your community as you can as work for you. But the point of my comments to you today is that volunteerism in the context of being a member of the legal profession is actually kind of special. And that's what I'm going to talk about for the rest of my time. When we talk about the concept of pro bono publico, working for the public good, we're talking about more than volunteerism in the general sense, more than doing those things that I listed at the beginning of my comments. We mean the use of our professional skill and training as lawyers for the benefit of the public good without payment. For lawyers, that usually means one of two things. One, pro bono volunteer legal work. So that's legal work per se, done without expectation of payment. Or two, volunteer work for charitable and nonprofit organizations. So unpaid volunteer activities which may or may not involve legal work, but which are connected to, related to being a lawyer. One paper that I read observed that 3 out of 4 lawyers in the jurisdiction in which this paper was created spent time doing legal work for free. That doesn't include their other, more general volunteerism. In another province, a study found that the average lawyer spent over 15 regular working days a year. That's the equivalent of 3 weeks vacation spent volunteering time, skill, and expertise as lawyers. In my firm alone so far this year, our associates have given many hundreds of hours to pro bono projects and files of various kinds. Most of my partners are also involved in doing pro bono work. Most of them don't even keep track of their time. But I know personally for some of them it is hundreds of hours, many thousands of dollars worth of time, and easily the equivalent of that 3 weeks vacation. Last week I was at the 5th National Pro Bono Legal Conference in Regina, being inspired and motivated by some of those people who are doing that work. And they left me totally awestruck by the level of commitment and the passion about providing pro bono legal services. Some of you were there as well, I know, and I expect that you may have had some of the same reaction. All professionals have the ability to do pro bono work. Sometimes we tend to think of pro bono work meaning work that lawyers do. Pro bono work is work for the public good using your skill as a professional. And all professionals have the ability to do pro bono work, and many different professions besides lawyers do have significant members of their group doing pro bono work. But I see the legal profession as different. Our profession, and I tend to nag students and young lawyers about this whenever I get the opportunity, our profession, more than any other, in my view, is one that quite literally has the power to change the world, to safeguard the democracy that makes our country so special, to make a profound difference every day in the lives of clients and communities. It's a huge gift. Sometimes it's just changing the life of one person, but sometimes it's a very grand scale, holding governments to account when laws present injustice, speaking out in support of the independence of the judiciary when judges are unfairly attacked and they don't have the ability to speak out and defend themselves, helping to establish democratic systems in developing nations, defending individuals who are marginalized and have no resources to do what they would have to do if they were ever to prove their innocence, advocating for human rights and for legal processes, and working to preserve the rule of law in innumerable ways. Only lawyers are uniquely qualified to do those things. And notwithstanding the important work of many other professions, lawyers will always be and must be at the forefront of the protection of the rule of law. We do it through our paid work as well, but much of that work gets done on a pro bono basis, and I'm going to give you some examples later on. When I told my father I was going to law school, he shook his head, said in exasperation, "Oh, you'll never make any money." That may have been an expression of his lack of confidence in my ability, I'm not sure, but I tend to think it was more to do with the fact that he recognized early on that I have an interest in helping others, and he was probably concerned that it would be difficult for me to charge people for my time. And he was right. It is difficult for me. It's difficult for many lawyers. Sometimes it's very hard to send out bills for work that you've done because our work can sometimes feel kind of nebulous. What exactly did I do? I just used my brain. I just thought. I just talked. I just wrote. It is valuable. And it's the only currency we have is our learning, our education, our training, our skill. But it's still hard to send out those bills. And I do it, as we all do in private practice, because the practice of law is a business as well as a profession. And to run a business of any kind, you have to be able to pay your debts. You have to pay your bills. You have to pay your staff. You have to feed and clothe yourself, among other things. And it's the successful part of the business that allows the rest of us who are interested in doing other things the freedom to do those other things. One very well-known and very well-respected Canadian lawyer that I correspond with periodically said to me the other day when I told him I was coming to talk to you about this topic, he said, "Well, give them a reality check as well as a pep talk." And I guess that the reality check part of this would be that you may not be able to graduate from law school and walk into a job that gives you the option of working as much as you want and spending the rest of the time doing things you feel like doing or you want to do or you care about. Certainly I remember my own interviewing experience and a moment that struck me and has stayed with me after I answered a question about what I was looking for in my career. The partner who asked the question, who's now an appeal court judge, heard my response and looked at me and said, "Well, after you finish saving the world, will you have time to do any real estate or wills files?" And that moment, as I say, has struck with me because you can't do the other stuff if you don't do some of the bread and butter of practicing law. Most of us can't. His question was playful, but it was sort of serious too, and it stayed with me, and it's a lesson that I have to keep coming back to periodically, and that my partners now probably appreciate me remembering from time to time, because you do have to contribute in a monetary way to a business. In the end, though, my father needn't have worried. It has taken me a while, but I've managed to carve out a career in a law firm that I'm proud of, as Professor Cotter says, becoming a partner and so on, and I'm able to contribute in other ways to various kinds of projects that are important to me. So I know it can be done, and furthermore, I work with or encounter lawyers every day who are doing every bit as much as I do and more, in addition to their paying work. And while you're working towards what I call that sweet spot in your career, where you have that flexibility, that influence, if you will, to be able to do those things, to devote a considerable amount of time, if you are so inclined, to doing what matters to you. While you're working towards that point, there are lots of ways to contribute your time and talent to a degree that provides you with all of the intrinsic sort of benefits that doing this kind of work gives you, and balances it with the need to deal with school and work and family and friends and heaven knows maybe some leisure activities for yourself and so on. So bearing all of that in mind, what I'm going to do now is give you, I wouldn't say it's my top 10 reasons, but it is a list of top 10 reasons, if you will, why providing pro bono legal services is a critical way to give back to your community, perhaps especially at this time in your lives. I need to give credit to Kelsey O'Brien, an associate in my office, who is a passionate advocate for pro bono work and who helped me to come up with this list from the perspective of a first-year lawyer. Be aware as well that there are lots and lots of lists in this area. Top 10 reasons why the profession should be obligated to provide pro bono services. Top 10 reasons why law schools should be incorporating pro bono programs into their curricula. Top 10 reasons why law firms must have pro bono policies, and so on. There's a zillion of them. And so these are just what I think are some good reasons why you might consider getting involved in pro bono work at this stage in your career and in your very early years of practice. Number 10, and this is in some respects really number 1 for me, but I'm starting with it because it's a big one. There's a need in our community, a huge need, as there is in virtually every community that you might end up living in when you graduate from law school. We live in a wonderful place with many advantages, but it's not perfect. There's extreme poverty, there's homelessness, there's a portion of the population that just falls between the cracks for any number of reasons. And as my young colleague, Kelsey, says, sometimes it's hard to even start to understand where or what the need is when you're stuck in the academic cradle of the College of Law. According to Kelsey, the first step as a student is to get out there and see what's happening in the community that you live in, after all. You've all heard about the problem of how to ensure access to justice, about the gaps in our justice system, the limitations of legal aid, and so on. It's not new, although I can tell you that when I went to law school in the 80s, there was very little discussion. In fact, I don't remember much of anything being discussed about the obligation to contribute legal skills for the public good, whether as a student or a practicing lawyer. That doesn't mean it didn't happen, of course. I know that people where I went to school were doing pro bono work. It just wasn't as big a deal for whatever reason in the ethos or in the knowledge base of the bar. Lawyers have always used their knowledge to help people for free. It's part of our tradition. But thank goodness, well, the need has always been there. We're more aware of the need now. We're talking about the need now. And more importantly, and thank goodness, we're talking about possible solutions and how to address the need. And there are many, many, many aspects that go into the answer of that problem, the answer to that problem. Today, everywhere you go, the legal world is talking about access to justice. It's all over the place, and how it's being denied to so many people, how the existing legal institutions in Canada can't keep up with it, how we need to fill the gaps, and how law students are a critical part of that process. And just still speaking about the need for a minute, here's just a little bit of information. It's been estimated that about 2 million Canadians will experience at least one legal problem in any given 3-year period. That's a huge number. And if you take a population that is marginalized or vulnerable, that number goes much higher. Every jurisdiction in Canada is developing its own statistics about access to justice and the need for services, and they're all startling. For example, Access Pro Bono BC receives 25,000 requests for legal assistance every year. Pro Bono Law Ontario helped approximately 14,000 clients in 1 year recently. Since 2007, here in Saskatoon, the classic Community Legal Assistance Program has this walk-in advocacy clinic, which many of you may be aware of, and they've assisted over 3,000 low-income clients through that clinic and over 15,000 through the Legal Advice Clinic in our little city. Pro Bono Law Saskatchewan has opened 6 new free legal clinics in the last year alone, and every one of them has a greater demand than can be met. PBLS has a residential tenancy panel, an immigration panel, a criminal appeals panel, and many other programs, every one of which is running at full capacity. Depending on the court and the issue and the jurisdiction that you're looking at, self-represented litigants may amount to more than half of the people going through today's court system, depending on, where you're looking. And yet, to qualify for legal aid in Saskatchewan, you must not have an annual income more than $11,820 if you're single, or $22,320 for a family with 2 children. And legal aid, remember, only generally provides assistance only in criminal and very limited family law matters. Just think about that income cutoff. As an articling student, depending on where you land, you'll be earning probably in excess of $45,000, and depending if you go somewhere to some of the bigger jurisdictions, thousands and thousands of dollars more than that as an articling student. Put those numbers together with the numbers regarding the need, the rate of legal problems in certain populations, and you see the disconnect pretty quick. And we know that if the legal needs of low-income and otherwise marginalized people go unmet, we know that it has a profound impact on other indications of well-being. So problems like homelessness, addictions and mental health problems, unemployment, disability of all kinds become hopelessly intertwined with unmet legal needs. And the whole picture leads to this spiral of dysfunction and instability. And helping to address those root legal issues can therefore have a profound impact on so much of our society and on the quality of life in your community, not just in the community of those people, but in your community. Number 9. Don't worry, they aren't all that long. That was just that one, because it's a big one, as I say. Number 9, exposure to other people and their problems through pro bono work is an incredibly valuable experience. That's a general statement, but what it does is it can bring a perspective to your own life that can be literally life-changing and certainly will be career-enhancing. Learning to interact with people from diverse backgrounds is an independent skill set that's important to develop no matter what your career path is. There is no typical face of a client in any area of the law, whether you're working at very high levels of corporate mergers and acquisitions or doing criminal defense work. There is no typical client. And you'll learn that better than any place else doing pro bono work. Every person's story is unique, even if there are commonalities with others. And doing this kind of work can give you a better understanding of the community that you live in, and that's just simply essential in the practice of law. Number 8, pro bono work can reconnect you with the joy of helping others. And some people are probably saying, I don't get a lot of joy out of helping others. But the thing is, all of you came to law school for lots of different reasons, but most law students, in my experience, have some desire that's been taken along with the rest of their motivation and brought them to law school. But it can be easy to lose sight of that and have it squelched completely when you're trying to master the arcane rules of property law or estates law, and you're being sensitized to the world of the billable hour that you're going to be moving into if you're going into private practice, or having to deal with the competitiveness that's kind of inevitable and inherent in the process of interviewing for articles, for example. You lose track of the fact that one of the things that brought you here is probably the desire to help people solve their legal problems. And the opportunity to get out of yourself, get out of that environment, get out of the building, and focus on something other than marks, jobs, papers. It's a way to remind yourself of and nurture that drive to help people that probably was part of the reason you ended up here. Number 7, you know more than you think you know. Law students, like many of us, in my experience, think that they don't know enough to really contribute in a meaningful way. You're nervous about even speaking out sometimes in class or wherever, lest you be seen a fool. Can't remember what that expression is. Better to be quiet and thought a fool than speak up and remove all doubt. Law students kind of take that to heart, I think. If I don't say anything, people won't know that I don't know anything. And the fact of the matter is that in this world, you do know something, and you know more than you think you know. And pro bono work gives you a chance to take the inherent traits that have made you successful in getting to this point and the learning that you've incorporated to date and start shaping them into what your professional life is going to look like. What's more, there's all kinds of projects being developed just for students. Talk to Pro Bono Students Canada, talk to the folks at Classic, connect with Pro Bono Law Saskatchewan. Those programs that are being developed and have been developed for student involvement will help you appreciate what you do know. And they'll help you to use your skills in new ways and stretch yourself out beyond your comfort zone. Number 6, pro bono work is an important source of relationship and a great way to meet like-minded people. The practice of law is a demanding profession no matter where you end up. And it can be a very lonely business. Speaking for myself, because, as Professor Cotter says, I didn't go to school here, and I'm not from here. When I came and started practicing, if I had not made an effort to get up and go out of my office, I could have just stayed in my office and practiced law for the last 20 years. And I'd probably be a pretty lonely person who didn't have very many connections out in the world. So, among other things, doing this kind of work, getting out and contributing what skills I do have, has been a very meaningful way for me to establish not just personal connections, but professional connections. There are very few places in Canada that I can't go and find somebody I know who's helped me with a problem or who has worked on the same issue as I have. And that's a huge value in this business. Plus, getting out into your community helps you to reinforce your own core values, allows you to work with other disciplines, builds relationships, allows you to network with others working in law, and do it in a way that's different than what happens in the boardroom or in the courtroom. You meet people with an interest in the same issues that you have. You meet people who bring a different perspective to those issues. And some of those people will have the ability to mentor you, to help you advance your own career. It's a way to keep learning and keep connecting, but in a social and rejuvenating way, which is only going to serve you well going forward. Number 5. This is an important one for me too. You join the battle and you contribute mightily to the long overdue, in my view, demise of the lawyer joke. One of the great mysteries in life for me is how our profession can be the subject of such derision in the public's eye, while at the same time, depending on who you talk to, it is well known that the legal profession is the profession most often seen doing community work, nonprofit work, charity work, pro bono work, and so on. I don't know what it will take to correct that misinterpretation. But I think that personal encounters with lawyers doing good work and having greater awareness of the good that lawyers do and can accomplish in their communities is one of the best ways to try and fight back against that misconception. Pro bono work is a huge contributor to that goal, both on an individual level and systemically, I think. It can counter the view that many people have, that lawyers are all just part of this lean, mean billing machine. It can provide a very tangible rebuttal to the outrageous characterization. I call it the Maclean's magazine characterization of lawyers as rats, which some of you may have not been aware of because it was a number of years ago and probably before you were into law school. But those of us in the room who have been around will be aware of that. And it can demonstrate to the public that we are motivated by much more than the almighty dollar and the bottom line. Number 4, it feels good. When I was typing this out, one of my partners leaned over my shoulder and said, "It feels good. What are you going to be doing? Rubbing your hips or something in there?" And no, it's not about feeling good physically. It's about feeling good inside yourself for what you're doing. Law school is stressful, as I said. Everybody knows that. Practice in the first few years is probably even more stressful. Volunteering your time and your talent as it's developing feels good. It recharges your batteries. It refreshes you. It offers a way to, again, get outside yourself, remind you to count your blessings. Knowing you're creating positive change can do a lot to reinforce a sense of self-worth. And the statistics on rates of temporary depression and anxiety in not just in law students, but in the legal profession in general, tell us that people need to be looking for ways to encourage themselves to feel good about what they're doing. And this is one way to do that. I mean, consider your articling year in a typical medium-sized law firm. Besides the challenges of CPLED, the daunting task of getting to know and meet the expectations of a dozen or dozens of lawyers, all of whom have a different view of how a particular task should be done, by the way. Nobody does things exactly the same way. So you've got to figure out how Joe wants it done, how Bob wants it done, how Mary wants it done, all to get to the same end, but by a different route, perhaps. And they all want it yesterday, or at the very latest tomorrow. You'll also be spending the entire year, I think, dealing with the fact that at least once a day, and probably many times a day, you're going to be asked to do some things that might be very important and that you have not got a clue how to do. And that, in and of itself, is an incredible source of stress. So you need to look for things that are going to make you feel better. And I'm telling you, this is one way to do that. And it might seem kind of counterintuitive that actually spending time doing something other than figuring out how to meet the expectations of all those lawyers and get all that work done, that spending time on something other than that is a good thing, but I assure you, it is. It'll be a positive outlet. It'll be a way to remind yourself and demonstrate that you are learning skills, that you are developing knowledge, and that you can use it to make a difference for somebody who, for sure, knows less than you do. And it's a good way to combat that stress at every level of your career. Exams, papers, CPLED, all that stuff kind of melts away when you're out doing something for someone else. Number 3, it's one of the few ways to get practical experience while you're actually in law school. That can be helpful in terms of success at school. Just by way of one example, I certainly, in the 5 years that I taught trial advocacy, saw a dramatic increase in the level of confidence and ability in students in my trial ad class once the rate of involvement in the classic program jumped up. It can also be an immense leg up when you're looking at how do I make myself marketable after law school. In my experience, and I spent many, many years on the recruitment committee of my law firm, employers are looking for students who have demonstrable ability, self-confidence, good people skills, a solid work ethic, the ability to juggle a number of tasks at once, and having pro bono experience shows you to be all of that, to be a well-rounded person who has an interest in the world outside the textbook. And not a lot of legal work actually gets done using textbooks. You need to be able to incorporate all those other things once you're out of law school. It just adds depth to your resume. The knowledge that you have already had experiences taking charge of a file, interviewing potential clients and witnesses, running a meeting, identifying legal issues, writing opinions, attending a hearing, appearing in court. All of that makes a huge difference in your desirability, for want of a better word, as a future associate. You come with value added. You walk in the door with it. And that practical experience can also help you identify where your future interests might be. You might have the opportunity to work on a landlord-tenant issue, on an elder law issue, on a wills and estates issue, on a situation involving domestic violence, on any number of administrative issues. You might get to run a trial in provincial court because you don't need to be a lawyer to do that, and many students have had that opportunity. It can be a way to test the waters, if you will, for something you've only read about otherwise. You'll learn in other really practical ways as well by being involved in this kind of work, how to write a letter so that someone with a limited education or limited language skills can actually understand it. Some people would say that's a good thing for the senior lawyers that you're going to probably end up working with too, and I say that in all seriousness. People want to be able to read and understand without working at it, whether you're a client from Classic or you're a lawyer with a very full plate. You learn how to listen to a story and pick out the important facts. You learn how to identify when a scenario that's being told to you has a legal issue and what that legal issue is, or realize that this isn't a legal issue. This person needs to be helped to find another resource. You become familiar with community and government resources. You understand how legal and administrative and bureaucratic processes work from start to finish. Those are all things that are super valuable and really hard to get exposure to in your formal practice, even if you've been out for a while, depending on where you end up, of course. There's always exceptions, but certainly in the larger law firms, those aren't the kinds of experiences that articling students and first-year lawyers usually get to get their hands into. There are intangibles to be learned as well, and to borrow from my friend Caradon Jordan, who is the executive director of Pro Bono Saskatchewan, and with whom I'm lucky to be able to work every day, because she's a passionate advocate of pro bono law. She says there are some things to be learned from the clients that cannot be taught by anyone but them. And that's true with every client, but it's especially true with these clients. That sentiment is well expressed in an article by Aaron Krinovich, a volunteer lawyer at a Washington legal clinic for the homeless. That's my phone ringing. I apologize. Aaron said, and I quote, "Clients can be inspiring, and they can be frustrating. But from them, I've learned what it means to be an advocate in the truest sense of the word, in ways law schools and traditional legal jobs will never be able to teach. These people are advocates for their own survival, and often for the survival of their families and children as well." I think that's so true. Number 2, we truly are a privileged profession in so many ways, and maybe, in my view, it brings an obligation to give back. As a lawyer in almost any kind of practice, you will earn more than the vast majority of the people in your community. Your success will give you the opportunity to see things and do things and have things that most people cannot even imagine. And no one but lawyers can do the legal work that will allow you that professional, and financial success. Lawyers, historically and at present, have a monopoly on doing legal work, with some special exceptions that allow people like you to do it as well. We are a self-regulating profession, which means in this country, for the most part, it's lawyers who control what lawyers do and how they do it. That is a huge privilege, and that privilege brings with it responsibilities, I suggest. Likewise, we get to set our fees. And in a monopoly, because that's what we have, the fees typically charged by law firms in this economy mean many people just can't get legal services in the usual way. And since we're the only ones who can do it, I say we pay for our privileged position by doing our bit, a little or a lot, to use our privileged status for the benefit of all of us. We remind ourselves that pro bono clients are not some special brand of human being, distinct from the rest of us. Anyone who has done any volunteer work has likely had occasion to think, this could be me. I know I've thought this. If I were faced with that set of circumstances, dealt that hand of cards, faced with those obstacles, this could be me. And as Cara Dawn also said to me recently, at the end of the day, we're all just trying to navigate life. And if we're not here to help each other, what are we here for? We all count, or no one does. There are lots of other reasons that I could add to my list, reasons why I think pro bono work is good for the legal profession generally, and for private practice law firms in particular, and for individual lawyers. But for most purposes, number one on my list takes me back to my earlier comments about being a lawyer. Number one, pro bono work can be a mechanism to exercise your power to change the world, to shape and protect our democracy, to create the kinds of communities we want to live in. Consider for a minute some examples. Operation Dismantle versus Her Majesty the Queen and the Minister of Defense, in which the esteemed Gordon Henderson raised Section 7 of the Charter to take the federal government and the Defense Department to task over allowing the United States government to test cruise missiles over Canadian soil. They lost that case at the Supreme Court of Canada. But think about the issues being argued in that case: the power of government, the risk of nuclear conflict, the nature and fragility of international relations. Another case, Canada versus Carter versus Canada, in which Sheila Tucker and Joseph Harvey, who is a champion of pro bono legal work in Canada, represented the plaintiff in the challenge to the criminal code provisions against assisted suicide on the basis that they were an infringement of the Section 15 right to equality in the Charter. The ultimate outcome of that case may well be a fundamental change in how we treat end-of-life issues. Regardless of your views on the subject, you cannot argue with the importance, the impact of that work. Those at the conference last week will have heard Dennis Edney tell his almost unbelievable story of commitment and passion in his advocacy on behalf of Omar Khadr. 15 years old when arrested and interned at Guantanamo Bay, and his treatment at the hands of the U.S. and Canadian governments. Again, regardless of your views, these are profoundly important questions dealing with the good faith actions of governments, the protection of national security, the rights and protection of child soldiers, the delicate art of international diplomacy, and the not so delicate art of political maneuvering. If you were at the national conference, you also would have heard James Lockyer of the Association in Defense of the Wrongly Convicted, or AIDWIC, when he spoke about the people, as many as 60 in Canada and over 300 in the United States, who've been exonerated, generally years after their convictions, and having spent sometimes decades in jail. Mostly using DNA evidence, but not solely. The names of those people are legendary in the criminal law world and in the pro bono world. David Milgaard, William Mullins Johnson, Thomas Sofino, Romeo Filion, Donald Marshall Jr., Guy Paul Morin, Stephen Truscott. Incredible stories. Or what about Dugald Christie's challenge to the BC law imposing a tax on legal services? As you may know, if you've looked at that case at all, the case was unsuccessful at the Supreme Court of Canada, and Dugald actually died tragically on a cross-country bicycle trip to raise money for that cause. But his work brought a spotlight to the issue of the cost of legal services. J.J. Camp, another renowned litigator in Canada at the height of his career, acted for the Canadian Bar Association, which, as Professor Cotter alluded to, intervenes in numerous Supreme Court of Canada cases advocating on behalf of the interests of the legal profession, always represented by formidably talented litigators who always act pro bono because the issues are that important. Speaking of the Supreme Court of Canada, what about the recent pro bono case brought by Rocco Galati in the reference to the Supreme Court on the appointment of Justice Nadon? Once again, an issue arguably of importance not only to our democratic process, but to those countries who view Canada's defense of democracy through our judicial system as a model for the world. Different direction, what about Tamara Hunter's representation of the women's ski jumping team in its bid to challenge VANOC and be recognized as an Olympic sport? The decision went against the women at the BC Supreme Court of Appeal in 2009, but despite that, the sport was included in the 2014 Sochi Olympics. As Tamara says, they lost the battle but won the war. One more controversial case, Joseph Arvey again, and his challenge on behalf of the downtown East Side sex workers of Vancouver against the prostitution provisions in the criminal code. That case led to a reworking of the test for public interest standing, a case of fundamental importance in allowing access to our democratic processes. Incredibly important cases, all of those, and whether wins or losses, the advocacy in those cases, all on a pro bono basis, involves issues of huge significance and profound impact. They're only, again, a tiny sampling, but hopefully they help you see the point I'm making. Many of those cases, by the way, involved law students who had the opportunity to work with the lawyers in those cases. Those kinds of opportunities don't present themselves unless you're out there and you're interested. One last example, lest I leave you with the impression that pro bono work must always be for these huge issues in order for it to be significant. Consider one Stephanie Yang, a young lawyer in Regina. Some of you may know her. Certainly the profs at the law school probably know her. Fresh out of law school at the time that this happened, took on the cause of a 13-year-old girl from Afghanistan suffering from cerebral palsy in Saskatchewan to obtain much-needed medical care. Department of Immigration realized she had overstayed. She was medically inadmissible, and she was going to be deported back to Pakistan or to Afghanistan, where she had been treated very badly. Steph began the process of appealing her inadmissibility, and finally, after a 3-year battle, she won her the right to remain in Canada on compassionate and humanitarian grounds. When Stephanie last saw that girl, she was walking, she was getting straight A's in school, in high school, and singing in the school choir. That girl, that little girl from Afghanistan, will no doubt go on to make some kind of significant contribution on her own, at least in part, I think, because of the efforts of one brand new lawyer committed to doing pro bono work. It's an incredible story. So you may end up dealing with issues of international relations or wrongful conviction or national security or the principle of solicitor-client privilege. It's another big pro bono case at the Supreme Court that I didn't mention. Or you might go on to volunteer with Lawyers Without Borders or do other work on the national or international scene. And you may well change the world or change the face of our country. But if you end up, on the other hand, helping one single mother keep her apartment, you end up helping a disabled man get his disability assistance. You help someone get repossession of their property or obtain compensation for an injury or stay out of jail so that they can support their family. Or if you end up helping one little girl who's a refugee obtain a better life here in Canada, you also change the world. One life at a time, but it's no less a change in my view. And although there are truly a zillion reasons why lawyers do this work, from my perspective, it just doesn't get any cooler than that. Those are my comments. Thank you. Well, in some respects, I don't think there's any difference. For one thing, Pro Bono Law Saskatchewan is opening free legal clinics in many of those little communities, Weyburn, Moose Jaw, and smaller ones as well, whose names just are escaping me at this second. But as I say, there were 6 clinics opened in cities or communities other than our big cities, just through that one organization and one program. So the issues are the same in those communities, I think, and the way to help deal with those issues is the same. The opportunity to do the work might be a little different, but I don't think there's